There's a story of Purim we've loved as kids, and then there's a darker version. There's beautiful and brave Queen Esther saving her people, and then there's what's likely to be a frightened woman ripped from her adoptive home because of her sexuality and forced into a harem. Whether the Purim story is fact or historical fiction doesn't matter much from a woman's point of view. Women often were seen as subordinate to men. So the fact that as of 5 years ago, a third of Reform rabbis were women shows just how far we've come. I'm Wendy Black, the WRJ Pacific District Program Chair, and tonight we have three distinguished rabbis address, from concubine to rabbi, women in Judaism from Purim to the pulpit. Our guests are Rabbi Emerita Sally Priesand, the first ordained woman rabbi in America. Rabbi Priesand served as spiritual leader of Monmouth Reform Temple in Tinton Falls, New Jersey, presides over Interfaith Neighbors, a local group that assists the working poor, and is a contributor to the Sacred Calling, 4 Decades of Women in the Rabbinate. Rabbi Amy Schwartzman of Temple Rodef Shalom in Falls Church, Virginia, is a former executive board member of the Central Conference of American Rabbis and co-chair of the CCAR Task Force of Experience of Women in the Rabbinate. She also is a co-coordinator of the Women's Rabbinic Network. Rabbi Rachel Bierman of Congregation Share MF in St. Louis is the Communications and Marketing Vice President of the Women's Rabbinic Network and co-creator of Midrashic Monologues. As each of them speaks, please write your questions in the chat and we'll take some after we hear from all three. This program is being recorded. First, Rabbi Rachel Bierman will address who are the women in the Purim story.
Thank you, Wendy. I am so pleased to be with you here in this Zoom room across time zones and across the country. And when I was asked to speak about the women of Purim, I could not say yes fast enough, because these women, Esther and Vashti, are just endlessly fascinating to me. And I'm so excited to be able to share with you about them tonight, and then hopefully to hear questions that you have at the end of the presentation. A quick story. I love costumes. I will dress up at the drop of a hat for any reason. And so Purim has always been my favorite dress up holiday of the Jewish year. As a child, I was, I want to say gently, very loud and very opinionated. And the way that I heard the story of Purim was that Esther was the sweet, beautiful queen, and that Vashti was the opinionated queen. It would take me decades to figure out that that's not the real story, but that is the story that I remember learning as a child. So as a child, I was always Vashti. I never dressed up as Esther, and I was very good at makeup. You are correct. Thank you for noticing that I was the product of my time as an 80s baby with all of the makeup to prove it. I remember being very offended when people at Temple would come up to me and say, "Oh, you're dressed as Esther." And I would say, "No, I am Queen Vashti." I loved Vashti from that moment on. As a child, my dog, who will bark at the least helpful time, is named Vashti. She is my soul pup here. And when I was walking her now as a rabbi, 30 years after this, very eyelashed child was showing up as Queen Vashti somewhere, I met a woman in the parking lot and she asked me what my dog's name was, and I told her Vashti. And I go, nobody ever knows who Vashti is unless I meet, a Jewish person in a parking lot. And then they're like, "Oh, I know." But this person I assumed didn't know. And I said, "She's named after a queen in the Hebrew Bible." And this woman said, "Oh, I know Vashti. She's the bad queen." And I said, well, I had to remind myself not to get into arguments in the parking lot with random people. And I said, I like to think that they're both the good queens. And they truly are. And so what I want to talk to you tonight is the historical baggage that we have inherited that has tried to tell us that one queen is bad and one queen is good, And the goodness of Queen Esther is defined by her beauty and by her meekness. And then I want to tell you a new story about them. So I hope you'll take this journey with me. And yes, I have many more pictures of myself as a Purim child, but that is not this presentation. We can do a second presentation someday where I just go through all of those pictures. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you'll be able to see and follow along. What I found fascinating as a rabbi and a historian, as a still loud and opinionated woman, just with a little bit better hand with the mascara at this point, is that Esther and Vashti have been used as archetypes of womanhood for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And the rabbis, ancient rabbis at least, absolutely contributed to this sense that they were opposites. And if you also think about biblical stories, besides the Purim story, where there are two people who could have been on the same team, and how often the text itself and then the rabbis afterward pit them against each other, whether it's Leah or Rachel as sisters, Isaac and Esau, all of the brothers in Genesis hate each other. Why? Why did they all hate each other? Hannah and Peninnah, two women who shared so much in their lives and yet were portrayed as antagonists. And Esther and Vashti, unfortunately, fall into that trap and are kept there by most of our patriarchal history. So as an example, Esther is said in Megillah 13a:20, the verse states, "And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all those who looked upon her." Rabbi Eliezer said, "This teaches that she appeared to each and every one as if she were a member of his own nation, and therefore she obtained favor in the eyes of all." The next verse states, "So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal house in the 10th month, which is the month Tevet. It was by an act of divine providence that Esther was taken to the king in cold winter month, in which the body takes pleasure in the warmth of another body, and therefore she found favor in his eyes." There is a lot of, I think the technical term is grossness, about the beauty of Esther. There is a lot of, it feels lecherous and leering about the beauty of Esther. But Esther is so beautiful that she is exactly what every person in this world could ever want or need. And now in contrast, Vashti is replaced by Esther in this piece of rabbinic literature, literally. The rabbis taught that there were 4 exceedingly beautiful women in the world. Only 4. The rabbis had very, very high criteria for who gets to be counted as the most beautiful of the land. Sarah, Abigail, Rahab, and Esther. And for the one who said, "Esther is green, remove Esther and insert Vashti," only one thought perhaps Vashti could count. And they continued, "For man receives measure for measure, rewards and punishment. Therefore, from Vashti's punishment, namely her being exiled from the palace, we learn that wicked Vashti used to take the daughters of Israel and strip them naked and make them work on Shabbat. So it is written, after these things, when the wrath of the king Ahasuerus abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decided against her." This is not in the text, right? We don't know anything about Vashti. In fact, if you're a big Vashti fan like me, you'll go back to the text and realize that there are only a few verses about Vashti. In my mind, she is half of the story, and in reality, she is barely anything. So the rabbis can't just let her be a woman who didn't want to dance naked in front of her husband's friends. Instead, she is evil. She becomes evil. One of the pieces of rabbinic literature says that she didn't want to dance because she had a tail and she was ashamed of it. It's gross is the best word for that. We'll go back to the text because I want you to see that even as we move forward for many centuries, many millennia or two, we continue to have this dichotomy. But Vashti refused to come. The queen of the harem is a proud woman. The beauty is a virtuous wife. She scorns the ultimate command of her lord and master. She abhors the disgraceful flattery of his debauched friends. Her self-rest forbids submission, and her chastity disdains coquettish demeanor. In her love of freedom, she retains the freedom of her love, but woe unto him who dares to approach her with the venom of free love. Vashti the beautiful is also Vashti the pure. So we see somewhat of a rescuing of Vashti, right? We're considering her perhaps in a positive way, but we also have to make her pure and untouchable. One more. Queen Esther was not a suffragette is the best statement I've ever heard, I think, in my life, from the Chronicle in 2nd of November, 1911. Queen Esther was not a suffragette. When invited to become the queen, she did not decline and see to it that she stood on the same ground as Vashti. She accepted her accession as divine providence. She clothed herself with humility and with the most becoming of her fine apparel. She made herself as agreeable to the king as possible. This story of Esther as the beauty queen and Vashti as the harpy who wouldn't dance, or the killjoy who didn't want to have fun with her husband's friends. I mean, it is what I saw growing up, and I didn't grow up that long ago, right? The story of the Purim spiel, how many of us have been in a Purim spiel where it's a beauty pageant and then Esther's just the prettiest gal around. And then Vashti is like this kind of comically intense feminist or something like that. It does so much damage to both women. Both of these women are so remarkable, and we don't get enough stories about them for us to be able to throw them away like this. Esther is a remarkable queen, and she saves her entire people. She may have been beautiful, but she was also brave and strategic and incredibly, incredibly strong. And we should celebrate that as much as, or I'm going to tip my hand, much more than her beauty. Vashti's entire story is left up to us, basically. We only have the end of her story. And as Wendy alluded to or said at the beginning in my introduction, I started to write Midrash several years ago. And I can imagine, I think you can imagine, that Vashti was one of the first ones I wanted to write about, because I couldn't wait to imagine a story. And I did. And the story that I imagined is that she was afraid, frankly, because dancing naked in front of a room full of men sounds not appealing, I think, for many reasons. But whenever I had read that story, I understood that underneath the request for her to dance naked is the threat of sexual assault, because she has no autonomy and she has no even ability to protect herself with the clothing that she has on her. So by denying that request, she was trying to protect herself. And that's a midrash that I wrote. But I'm still feeling ambivalent about Esther. I couldn't figure her out. I didn't, I'm a Vashti. Am I also a Esther? So I wrote a story of Esther, where Esther imagines herself in relationship to Vashti. And it's not very long, and that's what I want to read to conclude my time tonight. And I hope that it sparks in your minds a curiosity and an excitement and a creativity to write your own stories. And that's why I share it, because no one has owned the text more than we do right now. And so we can write the stories that we are looking for. And that has been one of the most transformative things I've learned in my rabbinate and in my life, frankly. We can write the stories that we're looking for.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, Wendy,
sorry.
Is it okay if I read the story?
Oh, please do. Sorry.
Okay, I promise it's not too long. So this is written from Esther's perspective. It is my husband and my custom to begin our days by breaking our fast together in the small sitting room next to his bedchamber. I am granted this extra time with my husband, King Ahasuerus, because of my position as his favorite among all the women in his harem. But just because I am his current favorite does not mean that he ignores my sisters of circumstance. And so every morning I leave my chambers, walk along the labyrinthine hallways of the palace, and enter my husband's suite. As I take my place at the small table where we eat, I always make sure to face the door that leads to his bedroom, so that I can offer a smile and a nod of acknowledgement to whichever woman slips from his chamber. These women do not hold the vaunted position of his favorite and are therefore not afforded the luxury of breakfast after sharing our husband's bed. I can only hope that my efforts to see them, to acknowledge them, are sustenance enough. Outside of my nights in our husband's bed, the hour or so we spend together in the early mornings is the only time that we are alone. In the years since I first came to the palace, Ahasuerus has become increasingly open with me, often sharing his feelings and thoughts as we sit with one another. Sometimes when he is feeling particularly introspective, he will speak about his first queen, Vashti, the daughter of King Belshazzar. And on the days when I have pleased him with my wit or my beauty, he will exuberantly thank the heavens for sending him a wife who is the opposite of the queen he cast aside. He always speaks of her as if I am unfamiliar with who she was, pairing her names with asides like my first wife or the old queen, as if I didn't know why he was in need of a new queen, as if I hadn't spent months being trained by the women of the harem who whispered ceaselessly of Vashti's bravery, of how she sacrificed herself in an attempt to douse the lust and violence of the king's men. He doesn't seem to see the power that she continues to wield. My husband thinks I am Vashti's opposite, but he is mistaken. I am not her opposite. I am her successor. The only reason that I do not drown in the poisonous waters of this palace is that I am standing on her shoulders. Each morning I smile at the women leaving my husband's bed because Vashti taught us that we stand and fall as one. I know well who stood with Vashti in the last moments of her life, who held her as she cried, offered her whatever comfort they could, and then watched as she walked bravely to her fate. I treat my husband's wives with respect and kindness, because someday I too might fall prey to the whims of my husband's moods. And if that happens, I want to be able to look around the room and see the comforting faces of friends. I survive because I have learned the lessons of my predecessors. Every time one of my husband's wives gives him a daughter, he laughs, holds the child high, and offers the exact same prayer. May she be as beautiful and as gracious as Esther. We wives, we sisters, we women smile, nod, and thank him for his blessing. And then once he has left the harem's walls, we gather together, surrounding whichever sister has just given birth, and form a chain, one to another, until we are all connected to the new mother who clutches her infant close. And then in one voice, we add our own prayer. May she be safe from the whims of cruelty. May she find a path in life that fills her with meaning. May she face every challenge with the strength and courage of Vashti. My husband doesn't see us. He doesn't understand. He thinks that he was successful in his attempt to rid his life of Vashti, but we are her descendants. We have inherited a world that she helped to shape. We are her successors, and someday we will rule in her name. Until then, we honor her bravery by holding on to one another, by refusing to allow the powers of the kingdom to tear us apart. Until then, we bless our daughters with her courage. Until then, we call to her in moments of weakness. Until then, we remember her in moments of strength. Thank you.
That was incredible, Rabbi. Thank you so much for sharing that. In 1972, our next speaker broke through the proverbial glass ceiling and made history as the first woman to be ordained as a rabbi in the United States. I remember the day it happened, and my reaction was, what took so long? Now we'll find out why. It is both my pleasure and my honor to introduce Rabbi Sally Priesand.
Thank you for that very gracious introduction and for inviting me to join my colleagues this evening. I'm speaking to you from my home in New Jersey. Grateful that technology allows us to connect in this way, something that would not have been possible 20 years ago. The Women of Reform Judaism has a long history on being on the side of ordaining women as rabbis. In 1965, NFTS passed a resolution calling on the three institutions of our movement to begin ordaining women. And 8 years earlier, at the UAHC Biennial in 1957, the amazing Jane Evans, longtime executive director of NFTS, spoke passionately about this very topic, saying that women are uniquely suited by temperament, intuition, and spiritual sensitivity to be rabbis. So we are grateful for the continued support of the women of Reform Judaism. The 50th anniversary of my ordination is fast approaching. So tonight I want to tell you a little bit about my journey to the rabbinate. I decided I wanted to be a rabbi when I was 16 years old. Unfortunately, I don't remember why. I remember wanting to be a teacher, and whatever my favorite subject was is what I was going to teach. And so one year I was going to be an English teacher, and one year a French teacher, and the next year a math teacher. And in the end, I decided to be a teacher of Judaism, which is really what a rabbi is. Fortunately for me, my parents gave me what I consider to be one of the greatest gifts that parents can give to a child, and that is the courage to dare and to dream. As a result, I remained focused on my goal, unconcerned that no woman had ever been ordained rabbi by a theological seminary, and determined to succeed despite the doubts I heard expressed in the organized Jewish community. In those days, I did not think very much about being a pioneer or a champion of women's rights. I just wanted to be a rabbi. While still in high school, I came to Cincinnati on a nifty pilgrimage. And I remember asking, as we were all gathered in the chapel together, if a woman could be a rabbi. The answer I received was somewhat non-committal. It wasn't a no, but it wasn't a rousing yes either. Shortly thereafter, I applied to the undergraduate program sponsored by the University of Cincinnati and the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. In response, I received 4 or 5 letters, the first of which suggested that maybe I would like to consider a career in Jewish education, and the last accepting me as a special student. You can find those 5 letters in the book, The Sacred Calling, 4 Decades of Women in the Rabbinate, published by the CCAR. Now, I was concerned when they said I was accepted as a special student. I didn't know what that meant, so I wrote back, and they told me that because there were no provisions for women in the dormitory, at that time, if you weren't married, you had to live on campus. I was accepted as a special student so that I could live in the dorm at the University of Cincinnati and later in an apartment. I was accepted to the undergraduate program, and in 1964, I began my studies. My years in rabbinic school were fraught with challenge. Some members of the college community thought that I came to marry a rabbi rather than be one. In fact, I had been dating one of my fellow students for a long time, and one day a professor went up to him and said, "Well, my boy, when are you going to marry her? Do the school a favor and get rid of her." My sincerity was often suspect, and I was under constant pressure to prove myself. Always I felt the need to do better and be better than my classmates so that my commitment and my academic ability would not be questioned. Occasionally, I sense that some people would not be overly upset if I failed to continue with the program. Now, the purpose of this undergraduate program was to allow me to skip the first year of rabbinic school. So one day I was an undergraduate, and the next day I was in the second year of rabbinic school, and everyone suddenly sat up and paid attention. And by the way, all this came about without my ever appearing before the admissions committee. Happily, I had the support of Dr. Nelson Glick, at that time president of the College Institute, who gave me his unqualified support and took care of a lot of little programs in the background that I probably never even heard about. Unfortunately, he died the year before I was ordained. But his wife, Helen, a distinguished physician in Cincinnati, told me that he said there were three things he wanted to live to do, and one of them was to ordain me. His vision and his commitment laid the foundation for the ordination of women. And fortunately for me and for all of us, his successor, Dr. Alfred Gottschalk, shared that vision. And when he became president of the College Institute, he made the dream a reality by ordaining me. Only in recent years have I come to understand how bold and daring that action was on his part. Apparently, certain members of the faculty tried to convince him that I shouldn't be ordained. 50 years ago, I did not realize the amount of pressure he was under, nor did I understand the courage it took for him to step into someone else's shoes and fulfill a mission someone else had begun. How grateful we all are that he was willing to do that and to affirm the equality of women in the Reformed Jewish community. On June 3rd, 1972, he and I stood together before the Ark at Cincinnati's Plum Street Temple, and he declared publicly that he was ordaining me with pride, dignity, and pleasure. Now, finding a job was not that easy. Some congregations wanted me for my publicity value, be able to say they were the first to hire a female rabbi, and others would not talk to me at all. I was the last person in my class of 36 to get a job. But in my opinion, I got the best job of all, assistant rabbi at Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in New York City. It always seemed particularly appropriate to me that I would come to a synagogue with a reputation for commitment to equality and social justice. And Rabbi Edward Klein, the senior rabbi, always took great pride in being introduced as the first equal opportunity employer in the American Rabbinate. I stayed at the Free Synagogue for 7 years, and to be honest, the circumstances under which I left were not all that pleasant. I hoped I would be given a chance one day to be the senior rabbi, but that was not to be. Neither that synagogue nor any other at that time was ready or willing to grant the title of senior rabbi to a woman. Indeed, for 2 years, I was unable to find a full-time position. I served as a chaplain at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City and accepted a part-time position at Temple Bethel in Elizabeth, New Jersey, a congregation of older members who were always warm and welcoming. In 1981, I became rabbi of Monmouth Reform Temple in Tinton Falls, New Jersey, a position I was privileged to hold for 25 years. The desire to retire 14 years ago was my own, believing as I do that rabbis and a lot of other people should know when to leave. It is always wise to say goodbye when they still like you. I did choose, however, to remain in my community, and as Rabbi Emerita, I worship at my temple every week, enjoying as I do the view from the pew. I am grateful to God that part of my life's work has been to open new doors for women in the Jewish community. But at the same time, I have tried never to lose sight of the larger mission of the Jewish people, which is to derive from the words of Torah a set of values and a sense of holiness that will enable us always to be partners with God in completing the world. What that means from my vantage point is not only participating in the task of tikkun olam, of repairing the world, but creating a Jewish community based on equality and inclusivity, remembering that all of us are God's children, and as such, we should all have the opportunity to fulfill our creative potential to the fullest. My experience tells me that we are richer for the gifts of female rabbis and female leaders. These gifts bring to our shared task things like rethinking previous models of leadership and opening doors to partnership and networking. Discovering new models of divinity, knowing that God embodies characteristics, both masculine and feminine. Training new leaders to be more gender aware by welcoming to our institutions of higher learning respected female scholars, able to share with us valuable lessons and insights unique to women. Creating new models, new role models, and allowing to be heard, often for the first time, the stories of those whose voices have been silenced for too long. The countless number of women who have enriched our people from biblical times on. Before I conclude, I would like to tell you about the person who was the world's first woman rabbi. Her name was Regina Jonas. She studied for the Rabbinate in Berlin, but the professor who was her mentor died the year before she was to be ordained. And the seminary refused to follow through with her ordination, although she had completed all the requirements, including a thesis titled, "Can Women Serve as Rabbis?" She was forced to wait until 1935, when she was ordained privately by Rabbi Max Dienemann, president of the Association of Liberal Rabbis of Berlin. At first, she was permitted to work only in schools, hospitals, and homes for the elderly. But as rabbis began to emigrate or be deported because of the Holocaust, she was invited to preach and fulfill rabbinic duties at various synagogues, gaining a reputation for her pastoral work and preaching ability. Now, a few years ago, I had the privilege of visiting Berlin and walking in the footsteps of Regina Jonas with a group of rabbis, historians, and lay people. The trip was the idea of Dr. Gary Zola, head of the American Jewish Archives, and the Jewish Women's Archive with Dr. Gail Reamer. And it was really an amazing experience. I was quite shaken by the number of similarities between my life and that of Regina Jonas. She did not see herself as a pioneer or a famous person, and neither did I. I just wanted to be a rabbi, and so did she. Both of us shared a similar definition of feminism, that is, all people should be given an opportunity to fulfill their God-given potential to the fullest. Her mentor died the year before she was ordained, and so did mine. In her case, the seminary refused to follow through, even though she had completed all the requirements. In my case, those who tried to stop my ordination were unsuccessful. I was always held to a higher standard, as was she, and often male rabbis and lay leaders told me to be patient, a word with which she was also familiar. She did not think that a female rabbi should marry and have children. It would be too difficult. And ultimately, I came to the same decision, believing that I myself would never be able to do both and do them well. She loved to preach and teach. In Terezin, we found papers on which she had handwritten some of the titles of her lectures: Women in Judaism, Women in the Bible, all these titles that all women rabbis have been asked to speak about. Before being deported to Terezin, Rabbi Jonas gave her documents to the Berlin Jewish community for safekeeping. Had she not done so, we would know even less about her than we do today. And not realizing that I was really following in her footsteps, when I retired, I announced that all my documents and papers would be given to the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati. And I invited all women rabbis of whatever denomination to do the same, so that anyone doing research on women in the Rabbinate could find what they need to know in one place. When we were in Berlin, we had an opportunity to see her papers. And we have her papers because she gave them to the Berlin Jewish community for safekeeping, and we never found them until after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it was just amazing for the archivist to bring out this small box of papers and for us to see that this was all that's left of Rabbi Regina Jonas. When I think about her, one of the things I admire most is that she chose the well-being of her people over her own self-interest. She could have escaped from the Holocaust, but she chose instead to accompany her people to the concentration camps, to continue to minister to their needs and help them find meaning and purpose in the values of Jewish tradition. We cannot help but stand in awe of her courage. When we came back from our trip, we were prepared to tell her story and ensure that she would find her rightful place in the chain of Jewish tradition. We wanted to make certain that the whole Jewish community, whatever denomination, would recite Kaddish for her from year to year. The actual date of her death is unknown, but with the help of the Holocaust Museum in Washington and Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, we determined that she was taken from Terezin together with her mother on October 12, 1944. And her name actually appears on the transport list. And she arrived in Auschwitz on October 14th, 1944, where it is assumed that she was murdered that very day, because we have never heard anything else about her. And that day just happened to be Shabbat Bereshit, the first Shabbat of the Jewish year. And so we have chosen Shabbat Bereshit as the date of her yahrzeit, and we hope that next fall you will join us in saying Kaddish for her. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share her story. I like to think that whenever we do, we bring honor to her memory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi, and thank you for sharing your story and her story and your challenges. Rabbi Priesand opened the door, and since then, hundreds of smart, inspiring women have followed in her footsteps. But what does the future hold for women who aspire to become Jewish spiritual leaders? To discuss the future of women in the Rabbinate, we bring you Rabbi Amy Schwartzman.
Thank you so much. I am honored and humbled to be here amongst my colleagues and friends, and want to thank both Rabbi Bierman and Rabbi Priesand for their inspiration in different ways, and just so great to be in your presence. I happen to be one of the people who has benefited in many ways from the great steps that Sally Priesand took to open doors for people like me. I was ordained in 1990, so 31 years ago, coming up on 31 years ago. I am the senior rabbi of a very large congregation, which I've been the senior rabbi for 23 years. I've been in this congregation this is my 31st year. And so I really have reaped the benefits of the hard work and the hard experience that people like Rabbi Priesand and many other women have had to endure. And I know, Rabbi Bierman, I see you shaking your head, that you as well feel that way. We both feel very honored and humbled to be here. And it's my pleasure to say a few words about where women in the Rabbinate are right now and what are some of the things that we're struggling with. I am also, as Wendy mentioned, the co-chair of a task force on the experience of women in the Rabbinate. And my work on the task force, I think you'll find interesting and helpful as you think about where women are right now. So before I am going to share my screen and briefly take you through some information and some statistics that I hope will help give you a sense of women in the Rabbinate now. And I've somehow gone ahead of myself. Here we go. Okay, let's go to the very beginning. There we go. Okay. The challenges women rabbis face today, that's what I was asked to address. I want to quickly take us through some statistics, issues of employment, pay equity, real-time challenges, and what the task force on the experience of women in the Rabbinate hopes to hand over to our movement in terms of bringing about change. Can everybody see okay? Okay, you can even see the end of the statement, because I can't, but you can. Okay, good. As long as you can see everything. Thank you. I see you, Rachel. As Wendy mentioned earlier, women in the Rabbinate make up about a third of the Reform movement's rabbis. There are currently 768 rabbis of the 2,200 or so total rabbis. I was ordained in 1990. My class was half women. Sally, 1972, one woman, and Rachel, more than half, I bet. Most classes at HUC are more than half women. The cantorial community has had the majority of women for many, many years. In my class, 1990, there were 11 cantors ordained, 9 of whom were women. See if I can move this so I can see my own screen. Okay, better. We have many successes. We have things we're still struggling with. In the Reform movement, there are the 40 largest congregations, congregations of over 1,000 families. 11 of those are led by women. And of our 768 women, actually only 235, and that might be a surprise to the two women rabbis, and it was to me, only 235 are in full-time congregational rabbinic positions. What are the remaining 499 doing? How did that happen? There we go. Sorry, everybody. Seem to Some are retired, Sally. Some are in chaplaincy, teaching. Some are in organizations. Many are in part-time positions, and 34 have become educators. So while we feel it's wonderful that a third of the rabbis out there are women, I think you have to take note of the small number who are working in full-time congregational positions. And in terms of employment, I reached out to the head of our placement commission to learn about this year's employment. Since Rosh Hashanah, 7 positions have been completed for our women. That's great news, right? Wonderful. One is becoming the senior rabbi in a C congregation. So our congregations are in four different groupings by number, D being the largest, C, and one of our colleagues is in a D congregation. 10 searches are almost in conclusion. 5 involve women, but we don't know whether they will get their positions. So there's some improvement going on there. More and more women are making their way into these congregations. Many of you may know because the Women of Reform Judaism was very involved in supporting the Pay Equity Initiative. And in 2018, our journal was about the Pay Equity Initiative and the learning that happened there. And amongst the things that some of the details explored was a comparison of salaries between 2011 and 2017. The book comes out in 2018, where really we see where pay equity and the gap in wages is significant. There were 21 categories that were explored. 11 showed a widening gap between men and women. And not to read through what's in front of you, but just to show you that you can see that in all of the cases that I shared, these smaller categories, mostly men make significantly more money than women. And that still is the case. Interestingly, the smaller the congregation, the greater the gap. Last point in this, in large congregations, the gap tightens significantly in the time period between that we're speaking about here. And whereas in about 2011, there was about an 11% gap between men and women in large congregations, that was tightened to only like 3 or 4% by 2017. However, women who are not in large congregations are not experiencing that at all. I wanted to show you this graph. In 2 years ago, at the CCAR convention, our task force led a conversation with the entire CCAR, and we asked these questions about what other rabbis thought were happening for their colleagues. Have you or a rabbi you know experienced gender bias in hiring or advancement? This is the entire body of the CCAR. This is actually a combined number because we did this on some small calls with people who couldn't attend. 91% of rabbis thought that they or someone they have known has experienced gender bias. 91%. How often have you been in a situation where you heard lay people talk about female rabbis' appearance? It's obvious right in front of you many times. 78% said that was something they had experienced, witnessed, been a part of. Do you think women rabbis are judged as successful by the same standards as their male counterparts? almost 89% say no. Do you think Jewish institutions are inherently biased towards male leadership? Most said yes. I want to show you what I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and come back to that. So you can, a little change there. We then spent a lot of time speaking with women about the experiences that we've had. I'm sure both of the rabbis on the call can easily address and speak to these various issues. We put these together in a graphic for you. And I'm going to just put it up. I've done it, given you 2 pages. I'm going to put these up and just give you a few moments to read what so many women, we are quoting the women of the Reform Rabbinate, things people have said to them, things they hear on a regular basis. So I'm just going to go back to this and share this and let you take in the words that are there. And we'll move on to another one. And I just want to mention that when we invited our colleagues to share these experiences, we had literally pages and pages and pages of quotes and comments and experiences like this. These are only a few. Coming back to our task force, knowing what, sorry about that, everybody. Learning what we did from the women and the men who participated in the various studies that we presented, we launched this task force, the Task Force on the Experience of Women in the Rabbinate. It was a 3-year undertaking that's coming to its conclusion in March. We spent the first year in research, gathering resources, rituals, articles, sermons, and texts. The second year, we brought our work around the Reform movement to talk to women of Reform Judaism, men of Reform Judaism, the Biennial, the CCAR. We were in NIFTY. We tried to get to every conference for an entire year, providing and participating in conversations about training, about bias, about allyship, and rabbinic support. In the last year, our goal has been to work to create policy change that relates to placement, that relates to boards of congregation and staff. We have launched a story project. Some of you may have experienced rabbinic monologues, which is women talking about their stories. We have a best practices program. And all of this is concluding at the end of this month with the summit of all the leaders of the Reform movement to talk more about the trainings that are available, the policies we're trying to push through, and how we can create a change in the culture for women rabbis. There's much to celebrate. I feel like I celebrate being a rabbi all the time. There's much to be concerned about, and there's still a great deal for us to do. I am pleased to be part of the process, and I hope that that's given you a small sampling of both the successes and challenges that are ahead. I will pause now because I think that's what I was asked to present, and go to our leader, back to Wendy, so that you can continue with questions. And I'm here also to answer any questions about what's happening for women rabbis today that I can. So thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for being on the front lines and keeping an eye on equality, or some inequality as it is. We've got some comments here from Cher Kritchmar, who is the president of WRJ Pacific. What a story. Thank you for being such a leader for women. So fortunate to have had one like yourself, bring women to the forefront who can and should lead us. Let's see here, from Stacy Nagel, who's also an officer of WRJPD. Rabbi, you may not have set out to be a pioneer and a role model, but your courageous journey makes just that. As a WRJPD and sisterhood volunteer, and as a Girl Scout leader for 18 years, you inspire. Oh, I'm sorry, it slipped. Hold on. Yeah, she wanted to obviously thank you from inspiring and empowering me. Her. Rabbi Bierman, this is from Julia. Have you written any other midrash, and if so, on what topics?
Yes, I've written lots of other midrash. So my project that I worked on with Rabbi Paul Kipnis is Midrashic Monologues, and it has a very easy website, which is just midrashicmonologues.com. But I've also been writing my own midrashim and putting it on my website. My interest in midrash is exploring voices that I think have been silenced. And Rabbi Priesand mentioned that that's one of her passions. And I also just want to say, as it's just a pleasure and a privilege to be on the call with Rabbi Priesand, with Rabbi Schwartzman. These are two remarkable colleagues that I have, and just wanted to say that out loud as well, that I enjoyed being able to listen to them. That's a gift. But I tend to write women's voices, but I also love exploring voices like LGBTQ voices in the text. The lack of those stories mean that people that I love don't get to see themselves in the text. Friends and family and loved ones don't get to see themselves in the text. So I write them into the text. And that's a real amazing gift that I get to have and that I hopefully get to share. So yes, I've written lots of other midrashim, including one on Vashti, which is linked to that one.
And Rabbi, you are certainly gifted. This, for me, brought us live. This was just wonderful.
Thank you so much.
This is from Harriet Ellis. What a wonderful speech. I'm so pleased you bring honor to the first female rabbi. You young rabbis stand on the shoulders of some remarkable women. Thank you for all bringing us this session. I remember when Rabbi Priesand was ordained, I was editing the Jewish paper in our Long Beach community then and gave her a big front page story. This is from Eliza Lesser. I don't know what temple TIOH is, but it said they've completed its senior rabbi search and enthusiastically elected a woman for this role last night. From Janet
Temple
Weinberg.
Israel from, oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Temple Israel of Hollywood.
Ah, okay, thank you. This is from Janet Weinberg. I know of men who would not belong to a synagogue with a female rabbi and a female cantor because they want a male clergy in case they want counseling. They would not be comfortable with a female for certain problems. Rabbi, have you ever run across this?
We all have.
Yes, we all have. On the other hand, it works the other way too. Sometimes men want to come and talk to a woman. It really, to me, it depends on allowing people to get to know you. And then they would be comfortable in coming to talk to you.
It is, though, quite troubling that these gentlemen who say such things are unable to visualize the other half of all of us and what might have been the experience of women who might have benefited from a woman rabbi or might have wanted a woman rabbi. That's not factored into their commentary. Of course, right, Rachel and I are. Yeah.
This is from Margie Meadow. Temple Beth Hillel Senior Rabbi is a woman, Rabbi Sarah Hronsky. We also have a female rabbi educator as head of our religious school, Rabbi Kira Stein.
Well, that reminds me that in my congregation, we almost always had a female cantor. So there were two women on the bima, and I used to tell parents, please take your children to other synagogues so they can see men can do this too.
Yeah, which brings a question. Now that there are women temple presidents and administrators and women rabbis, my temple is one of them, Beth Israel in Scottsdale. Has it changed the congregations in any way?
Why don't we go around and...
Okay, you can start. Go ahead, Amy.
I absolutely think it has changed the congregations, but you know, Sally, you have the longer view of that. But I mean, at the moment, I happen to be with a female president, female executive director. In my congregation, we have a female cantor and a male cantor. We are 3 clergy, 2 women, and 1 man. We have a lot of women. I absolutely think that the presence of women has changed both the feel of congregational life, the access of women to tradition, the potential for creativity in the rabbinate, a new way to look at Jewish tradition and our relationships with one another. And I also think it has changed men rabbis. So I think my colleagues maybe a little bit more than Sally's, and because we were more of a balanced numbers, that our male colleagues have also had the chance to change and benefited from the learning and presence of female friends in their midst.
You're right. You're right. Hey, Rachel, you have anything to say?
My dog is right underneath me.
I know your dog. I know Vashti.
I apologize. It's Vashti has opinions, which is just perfect. But I think that it has changed. It has not changed enough. And I think that we sometimes, and I am as I claim this as much as anybody, I think we sometimes imagine that because perhaps in our synagogues, we find a lot of women in leadership, that everywhere women are in leadership. And I will tell you that I was ordained 6 years ago, and there were synagogues that did not call any of my female classmates or me back for interviews. And it was not ever explicitly because we were women, but all of the male classmates got interviews and none of us did. So I think that there is still a lot of work to be done, but as Amy said, I am very, very inspired by the creativity and the leadership models that female colleagues are feeling empowered to explore. We have co-rabbis, co-senior rabbis, and non-hierarchical structures that are only to the benefit of the entire Jewish world. And in as many spaces as we can have leadership committed to safety, equity, and justice and truly safe spaces, I think we can only become stronger and stronger. So I'm hungry for more work and more change, but we absolutely have already made a huge dent. So.
Okay, well, I definitely agree with what both of you have said. And I'm just going to tell a story that, sometimes when we think we haven't made enough progress, we look for things that show us that we have. So this is a story about that. I'm very close to my Cantor's family. And when one of her sons was, about 6 years old, he went to a Solomon Schechter school, and they were having a day, bring a friend. So he asked me if I would come to school with him as his friend. So I said, sure. So normally when you're a rabbi and you go to a Solomon Schechter school, they want you to speak, but I usually don't want to. But that day happened to be the anniversary of my ordination. So all the little kids were on the floor, and I said, yes, I'll say something. And I said, when I was just a little bit older than you, I decided that I wanted to be a rabbi, but there was a problem. Does anybody know what that problem was? This little boy raised his hand and said, you were too young. And then another one raises, you were too little. So I looked at Simon. I said, Simon, would you please tell them why? He said, because you're a girl. So the fact that it never occurred to them, they were already getting used to the idea that women could be rabbis. That story always reminds me that we are making progress, and sometimes it is very, very slow. And I'll be honest, sometimes I'm very upset when I hear some of the things that come out of the task force, because they're the same things from 50 years ago, and it's very, very upsetting. And I know that out in the real world, when we talk about equality for women's pay, Jewish women would be in the forefront of fighting for that. So I'm wondering, why aren't we in the forefront of fighting for equal pay in the Reform movement? I think that's very important.
Thanks to especially Women of Reform Judaism for the Reform Pay Equity Initiative in conjunction with the Women's Rabbinic Network. This is an exceptional project. I agree, though, we're not moving quickly enough, and we continue to face real barriers that are out there.
Also, I'd like to just mention something sort of, well, first, two things. First, thank you for all the kind comments to all of us. I don't generally answer those because, to tell you the truth, I really don't know how. It usually doesn't come out right. So thank you. The second thing is that when we went to Germany, actually, we went to Prague after, and the point of our trip was to put a plaque in memory of Regina Jonas at the concentration camp Terezin. And if you'd like to see a 10-minute video of our trip and of that ceremony, you can find it on the Jewish Women's Archive site, jwa.org. You can find that, and you can find interviews with lots of women rabbis.
Thank you. This is from Lois Freed. Thank you, Rabbi Priesand, for introducing me to Rabbi. It's
Regina Jonas.
Okay. Thank you for sharing your amazing journey, story of resilience and perseverance. Let's see. This is a good question. What would be, this is from Janet Weinberg, what would be the equivalent to Rebbitzin? What do you call the husband of a rabbi, Rebbitzin, of a rabbi, not Orthodox? What do you call the husband of a rabbi if he is not also a rabbi?
Okay, Amy, you can answer.
Did you see my comment? You didn't see my comment below? First, I would say, and I'm not, these comments are not original to me, but the first thing I call my husband, Kevin, is lucky. The second thing is, yes, thank you. The second thing is, instead of calling him a Rebbitzin, he's a Rebbitz him. Ching.
From Sherigan, our president, we're so fortunate to have such an outstanding panel of women's rabbis here tonight.
I do think I'd like to say that the task force on the experience of women in the Rabbinate, while focused on women and wanting and of course needing to continue to push these issues forward, within our work is our other dimensions of equity issues, including LGBTQ, which I see a number of people asked about, and the footprint that the task force has made on issues such as ethics and best practices, bias training, which every board of every congregation should do, which every congregation who goes into placement should be required to do. We are pushing very hard on finalizing these goals. So Sally, I hope there'll be some progress. They also, with not connected, tethered to these issues are other imbalances in society that we hope the reform movement will grab pieces of what we've done to broaden the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And I just want to echo what Amy said, that one of the things that I find most inspiring as a Jewish feminist, as a rabbi, and as a member of the Women's Rabbinic Network is that as women rabbis, our focus is not only on securing safety and equity for women rabbis, it's for using whatever place we've clawed out of for ourselves, and those of us who have received the place that generations have clawed out before us, using that space to make sure that the world is safer and more equitable for all colleagues of all genders, of all sexual orientations, and having as colleagues, trans women colleagues are part of the Women's Rabbinic Network, part of who we're calling women rabbis. we are our diverse group within ourselves, and our diversity is a strength that allows us to make the world safer and more equitable. And that's part of our calling. Absolutely.
Marlene Matola has a very good question. What are the reasons given for paying women rabbis less than their male counterparts?
What are the reasons given, or what are the reasons?
What are the reasons for paying women lawyers less than men lawyers? I mean, we live in a misogynist world, my friends, and that's the bottom line. And it begins, there are roots to that in the very Torah we love. So let's, we have to own that too.
This is from Julia Weinstein. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Lost that again. For the rabbis, do you think we are making good progress despite the data, and has the Me Too movement helped more recently?
I think we are making progress. As I said, I know that I can only speak to the Women's Rabbinic Network. I can't speak to the task force, but the WRN is doing trainings on every rabbinical school campus across the country in order to make sure that we are educating and ordaining classes of rabbis, cantors, and educators who will make their synagogues safer. In light of the Me Too movement has allowed us to kind of turbocharge some of that work, because it has brought some of the money that we need in order to fund it. But in light of the Me Too movement, and Amy is with the task force is the absolute expert on this for me. I'm not, but I think the Me Too movement revealed that female rabbis have been experiencing a lot more harassment and unsafe environments than we had been publicly known, that had been publicly known. So it's women on the bima are as affected by the Me Too movement as women anywhere are. And that was a really painful revelation, actually, when that kind of wound was opened within the CCAR and beyond.
That's true. And I think that one of the responsibilities we have in our synagogues is try to make them sacred spaces so that people feel free to share their stories. And, that takes a lot of effort, but, and also to train people to feel safe enough to speak up, but also to remember that the rest of us can't be silent when we see things happening that shouldn't be happening.
Lori Permuter said, we actually had a child ask in our synagogue, Mom, can men be rabbis?
That's right.
Let's see here. Rabbi Schwartzman, do you know does paying inequality within the rabbinate, is it the same as for women outside of the rabbinate? Do you have any figures on that?
Can you just say that one more time? Is the
inequality within the rabbinate the same as a pay inequality outside of the rabbinate, or is it just
it is in parallel, but in some ways it's greater, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There's a greater discrepancy in a lot of especially, as I said, the smaller congregations. It's worse.
Also, I think that one of the things that occurred to me when you were giving all the statistics and showing that it was only 200 some who are in full-time positions, we also have to understand that sometimes a female rabbi or a male rabbi might choose to be in a part-time position. That's an important thing too. I know when I always thought that Monmouth Reform Temple would be a stepping stone, that I had a responsibility as the first to be the senior rabbi of a big congregation. And my temple taught me that that wasn't necessary. That, we created our own temple family and they let me experiment and be creative and have ideas and respond. And that's a good thing. So part of having women in the rabbinate is also allowing people to make their own choices.
But it is noteworthy that many congregations are not able to accommodate, are not able to step up in ways that support women, and women. Some women have a see the path forward only as being part-time and often not being able to be in the congregation, which saddens me greatly when I hear those stories.
I'm sorry, Amy, go ahead.
Over to you, Rachel. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say that in the pandemic, this is exacerbated. So it's, as we've been learning and hearing about so many women in the professional world, because of society's understanding of women's time as less valuable than men's, women are in heterosexual relationships, women are often the parent who is having to reconfigure their entire lives in order to be able to support their children in homeschooling. That is happening in the rabbinate as well. And female rabbis are feeling that pressure immensely, even if and when they are married to other rabbis, some of whom they work with, or other clergy. That pressure is absolutely exacerbated in this moment in history.
Karen Tanner wants to know, what is the status for women who are gay or trans in becoming rabbis?
Women of all sexual orientations or gender identities are welcome to the rabbinate and celebrated as individuals and unique spirits. Again, that is the ideal. And then the reality of whether or not people are hiring candidates based on their understanding of whether, everybody would like to have a rabbi who is this or that, is unfortunately not living up to that ideal, I think.
Are there any parts of the country more or less receptive to women rabbis, particularly in large congregations?
Well, I think we can see that the coasts do hold. When you think about the women who are serving large congregations, St. Louis has one, but the majority has two. The majority are in on the coast. There's Chicago. There's but of the Reform movement has nearly 900 congregations. The largest 40 congregations, 25% of those congregations have a woman at the head. And
that's only in the last few years.
Yes, and I wanted to mention one thing, if you don't mind, and that is that the majority of us, and I am in this category, the 8 out of the 11 of us are internal hires. So that means that I came to Temple Road of Shalom as an assistant and then an associate, and I was offered the position of senior rabbi. But the majority of women do not get offered positions from the outside, only from the inside. And I think we have to, reflect on that too, culturally, and take that into account. Not so much in smaller congregations. So in smaller congregations, women and men both take these positions from the outside, but not not in large congregations. The majority of us come up from within the congregation, and I am part of that group.
In light of what you've all learned, what advice would you give to young women who might be interested in entering the clergy?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's been an incredible joy. There has been so much meaning and purpose and happiness, engagement that overshadows the challenges that, the people with the inappropriate statements that I live with all the time. The meaningfulness of the rabbinate supersedes and it, really overshadows, at least for me. And I hope, Rachel, even in your 6 years, you feel that way too.
I'll go next so that Rabbi Priesand can close out the advice, because that feels the most appropriate. I also just want to say that every time I see Rabbi Priesand, I become like the screaming fangirl at a Elvis concert because she's so remarkable. And just truly and
Thank you. I remember the dinner when you sat next to me.
when I realized it was you, and then like proceeded to have a panic attack for the next 2 hours because I could not believe this was happening. And then call every person I had ever met to tell them that I had sat next to you. I'm getting red just thinking about it, Sally. I would say that I hope that by the time they become rabbis, we will have gotten the world all the closer to an equitable and safe place for them to thrive. And I would say that most of my life has been shaped by the Rabbinate, for many years in pursuit of the Rabbinate, and then more recently having entered the Rabbinate. And it is exactly the right profession for me. And having that opportunity to work in a place that you feel like you fit so well, and hopefully make it stronger and better for the generations afterwards, is all that I could ask for, and hope for other people. So give us a little time, we'll make it even better. And then when they get there, we'll be excited to welcome them and hear their ideas. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Well, it really doesn't get any better than to be able to touch the lives of other people in ways that you probably don't even know about. I often find out things 25 years later where somebody will call and say, you married my parents, I want you to marry me, or, different things like that. This is my advice. First, know yourself and be yourself. I think that lots of people know, certainly in my case, when I was the first, a lot of people knew how I should be, what the first woman rabbi should do, how she should dress, everything. I had long hair down my back with very short skirts. It was, it was the style. So know yourself and be yourself. Don't be afraid to fail. Success is good, but you learn a lot from failing. Be humble. I think humility is a lost virtue in our world. And finally, maintain your sense of humor. It's very important.
Julia Weinstein would like, is Rabbi Schwartzman able to share the 2 slides with the infographics about the comments that women reported?
Would you when you say share, do you mean, would you like me to send them to you, Wendy, for you to send out, or do you want me to show it on the screen right now again?
No,
like Julia,
send out as a PDF, those 2. They're very powerful slides. If you could share those.
I'll follow up with that. I have, Wendy, I have your email and Julia's email, and so I'll try and get that out. Okay. Actually, I have at least 4 of those pages. I picked 2.
I would love to see all 4, and we'll share them with people on this call as well.
And can I just, Wendy,
were the rabbinic monologues, is that available now? They were reading, I know they were putting it all together so congregations could see it.
That's right. So another outgrowth of our task force was the creation based on stories that many different people at many different times have told, but we brought them together in a play form called the Rabbinic Monologues. And we recently got funding, and it's been put into film form, and it is going to be out, I think, after the CCAR convention by the spring. So yes, congregations, it would be really meaningful for congregations to watch, listen, and reflect together on what these monologues share.
Faye Brislon asks how boards explain the pay discrepancy between men and women. Of course, some of these boards not only have women members, but are headed by women. Do you still have the same problem with boards headed by women?
Yes, I mean, bias is really, it lives in all of us. And, when one of the programs that the task force has put together is an allyship program, it is not only for men. Women, like Sally and myself, need to be allies for other women as well. And, unfortunately, I've heard boards come up with all sorts of excuses as to why their pay is what it is. the CCAR produces a salary survey every some years, and it is in black and white that these congregations aren't paying their rabbis sufficiently. And whether it's because they say they don't have the money, or the money should go to other places, the rabbi hasn't been in the field long enough, whatever it might be, there are a million reasons why, and Rachel knows them.
No, oh no, that was not my my hand up. I was not, I don't want that hand up. I was just gonna say, Amy, what you just said about all of us need to be allies for one another. I really hope that as everyone on the call has listened tonight and looks at those slides that Rabbi Schwartzman will send out, we need all of you to be allies for your clergy of all genders. So if you hear comments like that being made about or toward your clergy of any gender, it's very uncomfortable, and we train and try to figure out how to say back, let's not talk about my outfit. What'd you think of the sermon or something like that? But you are all in a position to intervene as well, and to speak to the people who you hear saying those things, or to filter even just yourselves, because some of these comments are not coming from mean or cruel or critical places. Sometimes it's a way we are trained by our society to interact with one another, but helping to model that, as I assume that we have many synagogue leaders on this call tonight in your own synagogues, in your own communities, and helping to be allies and to intervene when you hear other people making comments like that is an incredible role that for all of us, because we are not just the clergy, we are also allies for one another. And you are not just congregants, you are allies for one another and community members. You are allies for one another and for us. So we can do it stronger for each other.
Yeah, I know there have been women conservative rabbis and Reconstructionist rabbis, but when some segments of the Orthodox started looking toward that, were you ever contacted by Orthodox women who were interested in that kind of work?
Well, we want to mention first Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, who's the head of Maharat Yeshiva for Women in Riverdale, New York. They have now ordained, I would say it's been about 4 or 5 years now that they've been ordaining women. I had the privilege of being present at their first ordination ceremony. And we had a group, we called ourselves the Four Firsts. So I represented Reform, Amy Eilberg represented Conservative, Sandy Sasso represented Reconstructionist, and Sarah Hurwitz represented Modern Orthodox. And we, for a while, we traveled around the country. I was sort of in charge of getting the gigs, and we traveled around the country together to show people that that 4 women of different theological beliefs could sit on the same stage and actually get along with each other. So we became friends over the years.
Well, thank you, Rose. Could go for hours. This has just been fascinating. We're very grateful for sharing your words of wisdom, and I'm sure we're going to be thinking about all this for a long time. The program committee hopes you can join us next month, for which are to be 2 more wonderful programs. Coming live from Israel on Sunday, March 7th at 9 a.m. Pacific will be Chef Tamir Barak. And then on Wednesday evening of the following week, March 17th at 7 p.m. Pacific, one of the most influential rabbis in the world, Rabbi David Wolpe, will give his evocative views on, did the Passover story really happen? I assure you, after listening to Rabbi Wolpe speak, you'll never look at your Haggadah the same again. Until then, we wish you a happy Purim. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe and good night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure. Take care.
Be well and stay safe, everyone.